My wife was pulled over for speeding, the officer ran her license, and he pulled me aside. Sir, I need you to listen to me carefully. Do not go home. Get somewhere safe. I was stunned. Why? He paused. I can't explain now, it's horrifying. Then he handed me a note. I opened it, and I found out the shocking truth. The stretch of highway just outside Boulder was quiet that afternoon. The sun hung low in a cloudless sky, casting a golden hue over the foothills. Ethan Miller glanced out the window as his wife Rachel drove, her fingers relaxed on the steering wheel, her gaze focused but calm. They had just spent the weekend visiting her parents in Fort Collins, a routine trip that always left them both feeling grounded and oddly refreshed. Rachel hummed softly to a song on the radio, and Ethan, still digesting the late lunch they'd had, leaned his head back against the seat and closed his eyes. It was one of those days that barely registers in memory, a day like 1,000 others. Ethan had no meeting scheduled for Monday, and Rachel had cleared her calendar at the last minute. They were, for once, ahead of the week instead of scrambling to catch up. The familiarity of the moment, the comfort of knowing exactly what lay ahead, the stop at the grocery store, dinner prep, emails, maybe a movie, made it all the more jarring when the flashing blue and red lights lit up behind them. Rachel glanced at the rearview mirror and cursed under her breath. Ethan opened his eyes, instantly alert. Was I speeding? She asked, puzzled. I don't think so. Maybe 5 over. Nothing serious. Still, she pulled to the shoulder, rolled down her window, and reached into the glove compartment for her registration. Ethan sat up straight, watching the side mirror as the patrol car came to a slow stop behind them. The officer who approached was tall, mid-40s maybe, with a clean-shaven face and sharp eyes that didn't match the casual pace of his walk. His badge read T.W. Carlson. He didn't greet them with the typical politeness Ethan expected. Instead, he asked for Rachel's license and registration without a smile, then turned his attention to Ethan. You the husband? He asked, eyes locking onto him. Yeah. Ethan Miller. The officer nodded slowly, then glanced at the documents Rachel had handed him. Wait here, he said, then returned to his cruiser. Minutes passed. Rachel drummed her fingers on the steering wheel, clearly annoyed. Seriously? I was maybe 8 over. This is ridiculous. Ethan watched the patrol car's side mirror. Officer Carlson was not inside running plates or writing a ticket. He was staring at their car, not moving. Then, without warning, he stepped out again and approached Rachel's window. But this time, he didn't speak to her. Sir, can you step out of the vehicle for a moment? He said to Ethan. Rachel looked startled. Is something wrong? I just need a word with your husband. It'll only take a minute. Ethan unbuckled and stepped out, confused but not alarmed, yet. The officer led him a few steps away from the car, until the engine noise faded and Rachel was well out of earshot. He looked around once more before speaking. I need you to listen carefully, he said, his voice low and measured. Don't go home. Not tonight. Not tomorrow. Find a hotel, a friend's house, somewhere safe. Ethan blinked. What? What are you talking about? The officer didn't answer immediately. His jaw clenched, and his eyes darted toward the horizon. He pulled something from his pocket, a small, folded piece of paper, and pressed it into Ethan's hand. I can't explain here, he said. They might already be watching you. Listening. Ethan felt a knot form in his stomach. Who's they? What's going on? Carlson shook his head. It's worse than you think. I shouldn't even be talking to you. But I saw your name, and I couldn't. Just don't go home. Please. Before Ethan could press further, the officer turned sharply and strode back to the car. He handed Rachel her license and registration with a nod, then walked straight back to his cruiser. No ticket. No further explanation. Rachel watched Ethan return, eyebrows raised. What was that about? Ethan slid back into the seat, his heartbeat pounding in his ears. Nothing. He just gave a warning. Let's get moving. Rachel frowned but started the engine. The patrol car didn't follow. As they pulled back onto the highway, Ethan opened the paper in his hand, careful not to let Rachel see. The message was scrawled in shaky handwriting, barely legible, but it stopped his breath cold. They know where you live. They're listening. You have 12 hours. The edges of the paper trembled in his fingers. He read it again, then folded it, shoved it into his jacket pocket, and forced a neutral expression onto his face. Rachel glanced at him. You okay? Yeah. Just tired. But his mind was racing. Every assumption he'd had about the day shattered in that moment. Whatever was happening, it had started already. And someone, something, was after them. And Ethan had no idea why. Rachel didn't press for details during the drive, but Ethan could feel her eyes flick toward him every few minutes, as if trying to read something unspoken on his face. He stared out the passenger window, his hand gripping the folded note in his pocket, his mind running in every direction at once. The officer's warning replayed over and over in his head, don't go home. Go somewhere safe. 12 hours. And worst of all, they're listening. He didn't know who they were. He didn't know what they wanted. But something in the officer's voice, in his eyes, made it clear that this wasn't a prank or a misunderstanding. It was real. And it was serious. Rachel finally broke the silence. So, you want to tell me what that was about? Ethan turned to her, trying to sound casual. He thought I looked like someone he pulled over last week. Just wanted to be sure. Said he was working a case and was being extra careful. She narrowed her eyes. That's it? He nodded. Yeah. She didn't look convinced. Then why didn't he give me a ticket? Ethan forced a shrug. Maybe he was just being lenient. Rachel didn't push further, but the air between them had shifted. Whatever she suspected, she wasn't ready to argue. Ethan used that silence to think. He had to make a decision, fast. Whatever was happening, it couldn't involve Rachel. At least not until he understood what they were dealing with. As they neared the city limits of Boulder, he spoke again, carefully. Hey, instead of heading home, how about we stop somewhere for the night? Grab a motel, get some sleep. I'm beat. Rachel raised a brow. We're less than 20 minutes from home. I know. But I don't feel right. Just tired. Maybe we could grab a place downtown, near Pearl Street? Make a night of it? She gave him a long look, the skepticism clear, but then she sighed. Fine. But if this is your way of getting out of doing laundry tomorrow, I'm not falling for it. Ethan managed a weak smile. Fair enough. He pulled out his phone and searched for hotels nearby, settling on a modest inn near the edge of town. It wasn't flashy, but it was clean and out of the way. He booked it under a false name using an old work travel profile he hadn't used in years. It might not matter, but if someone was tracking them, any layer of anonymity could help. They checked in just after 7 o'clock in the evening. Rachel collapsed on the bed, stretching her arms above her head with a groan. Okay, fine. You win. This does feel kind of nice. Ethan chuckled softly, but his mind was elsewhere. As Rachel disappeared into the bathroom, he sat at the small desk in the corner of the room and powered on his laptop. He didn't know what he was looking for, but he needed answers, fast. The officer's words haunted him. They're listening. Was it metaphorical? Was someone spying on them? Was his phone compromised? His email? He reached for his phone and toggled airplane mode, then turned it off entirely. Rachel's phone too, just in case. When she came out of the bathroom, towel wrapped around her, she shot him a confused look. Why is my phone off? Battery was low, he said quickly. Thought I'd charge it. She didn't question it. Later, once she fell asleep, he waited until her breathing had deepened before turning his laptop screen away from the bed and logging into his personal email. Most of it was junk, ads, bills, updates from services he barely remembered signing up for. Then he saw it. An email sent at 3:22 that morning. From his own address. He stared at the sender line. There was no name, no signature. Just himself. He opened it. There was only one sentence. You left a hole. They got in. No subject line. No attachments. No reply option. He checked the headers. It was stripped of all metadata, no trace of origin, no IP, nothing. As if it had come from nowhere. Or everywhere. His skin went cold. He remembered something Marcus once said, back when they both worked in security. If someone sends you a message using your own credentials, you've already lost. He closed the email and opened the app that controlled their home security system. Live feeds began to load: front porch, driveway, kitchen, upstairs hallway. Everything looked normal at first glance. But then he checked the archives. Something felt off. At 2 o'clock in the morning the night before, the kitchen lights turned on. No motion detected, just lights. Then off again 10 minutes later. At 3 o'clock, the front door unlocked. Again, no motion recorded. Then, a still frame from the hallway cam, someone standing at the end of the corridor. Not moving. Just standing. Ethan zoomed in. The figure was wearing a hooded jacket. The video was grainy, the face impossible to make out. But something about the posture, the way the shoulders tilted, the way the left foot pointed slightly inward, it felt eerily familiar. He zoomed in on the jacket. Dark gray, with a torn seam near the collar. His jacket. One he hadn't worn in weeks. He stared at the screen, his breath catching in his throat. That was his jacket. In his house. On someone, or something, he didn't recognize. He shut the laptop and looked toward Rachel, still sleeping peacefully. He couldn't tell her. Not yet. Instead, he took out the note from the officer again and unfolded it. He stared at the words, now blurred from the sweat of his hands. They know where you live. They're listening. You have 12 hours. 12 hours from when? From the traffic stop? From the email? From the break-in? There was no way to know. He lay down beside Rachel, fully clothed, eyes fixed on the ceiling. He didn't sleep. Not even for a second. By 6 o'clock in the morning, he had made a decision. He picked up his phone and, after hesitating, scrolled to a contact he hadn't called in years. Marcus Taylor, DoD Cyber Intelligence, retired. They hadn't spoken since Marcus left the military, but if there was anyone who could help him understand what was happening, it was him. Ethan sent a single message: need help. Urgent. Can't talk here. Can we meet? The reply came almost instantly. Where and when? Ethan responded, parking lot behind Conoco off 93. 30 minutes. Rachel was still asleep when he quietly left the room. As he walked through the early morning mist, he couldn't shake the feeling that someone was already watching him. That no matter where he went, what he said, what he did, someone, something, was always one step ahead. Ethan stood in the back corner of the Conoco gas station parking lot, hands in his pockets, eyes scanning the empty street beyond. The morning air was still cool, though the first hints of sunlight had begun to stretch across the pavement. Cars passed occasionally, but the lot itself remained quiet. He had chosen this place for its obscurity, a nondescript location on the edge of town, far enough from the hotel to avoid drawing connections. He heard the low hum of an engine before he saw the car. A black Ford Escape pulled in slowly, pausing near the rear of the lot before coming to a stop. The driver's door opened, and Marcus Taylor stepped out, wearing jeans, a dark windbreaker, and mirrored sunglasses that reflected the rising sun. Ethan hadn't seen him in almost 5 years, but nothing about him seemed to have changed. Same squared shoulders, same cautious gait, same steady, analytical gaze that once made him the best intel officer in their unit. Marcus walked up without a word and gestured for Ethan to follow. They stepped behind the building, out of view of the street and any passing security cameras. Only then did Marcus speak. "Talk fast. I've got maybe 10 minutes before someone notices I've rerouted my signal." Ethan didn't hesitate. He pulled the folded note from his pocket and handed it to Marcus. Marcus read it once, slowly, then again. "Where did you get this?" he asked. "A state trooper. Pulled us over last night outside Boulder. Said not to go home. Gave me this and walked away." Marcus narrowed his eyes. "Name?" "Carlson. Officer T. W. Carlson. Mid-40s, clean cut, looked shaken. Wouldn't explain." Marcus looked off toward the road for a moment, then returned his focus to Ethan. "And you haven't been home since?" "No. Got a hotel under a fake name. Shut off all devices. This was the only message I sent." Marcus nodded, then pulled out a small device from his pocket, an unmarked rectangular object with a single blinking green light. "Faraday pulse. Kills signals for 20 feet. We're safe to talk for now. But I need to know everything. Start from the beginning. Everything that's happened in the last 48 hours." Ethan recounted the entire sequence: Rachel getting pulled over, the strange behavior of the officer, the note, the email from his own account, the live feed from his home cameras, the figure in the hallway wearing his jacket. Marcus listened without interrupting, arms crossed, occasionally tapping something on a small digital pad he held in his other hand. When Ethan finished, Marcus looked down at the note again, then back at him. "You're not crazy," he said. "This is real. And you're in deep." Ethan's jaw tightened. "I figured that much. What you saw, especially that message from your own email, that's not normal hacking. That's deep system penetration. Could be state-level tech, or someone with access to dark network protocols. But this?" He held up the note. "This means someone on the inside is trying to warn you. Which means someone else is trying to erase you." Ethan swallowed. "Any idea who they are?" Marcus hesitated, then said, "Not yet." "But you said your wife works for a pharmaceutical company?" Ethan nodded. "She's in regulatory compliance at Darnell-Meyer Labs. Mostly boring reports and cross-checks. Or so I thought. Has she mentioned anything unusual? Any strange behavior at work? Sudden security changes, internal audits, data access restrictions?" "She did say something a few weeks ago. One of her coworkers disappeared, Vanessa someone. No notice, no emails, just gone. Rachel said HR brushed it off as a personal leave, but no one really bought it." Marcus frowned. "That could be connected. A lot of these operations start with whistleblowers going dark. If someone inside tried to leak something, and your wife was adjacent to it, well, let's just say no one's out of reach anymore." Ethan looked away. "So what do I do?" "First, you keep Rachel in the dark until we know more. Whatever's happening, you can't protect her unless you understand it. Second, you get me access to your home system. I'll spoof a ping through a satellite node and try to trace the breach. It's already been hacked. Someone was there, Marcus." "Exactly. And whoever they are, they're not just watching, they're preparing something. Maybe a setup, maybe leverage. But it's not just about surveillance. It's a message. And it means they're not done with you." Ethan exhaled slowly, rubbing his hands over his face. "So what now?" Marcus handed him a burner phone. "I'll contact you through this. No other lines. Keep yours off, always. I'll dig through your home logs, firewall activity, old system backups, see if I can find a backdoor or footprint." Ethan took the phone and nodded. "What if they come after Rachel while I'm gone?" Marcus looked him dead in the eye. "Then we're already too late." Without another word, he turned and walked back to his car, the sound of gravel crunching beneath his boots. The Ford Escape pulled away seconds later, disappearing down the road. Ethan stood in the empty lot for a moment longer, holding the burner phone in one hand and the note in the other. He was in the middle of something he didn't understand. Something vast and invisible and crawling just beneath the surface of normal life. A system watching him. Tracking him. Maybe planning something much worse. And the clock was still ticking. By the time he returned to the motel, Rachel was already awake, sitting at the edge of the bed in a sweatshirt and shorts, scrolling through a local news site on her tablet. She looked up as he entered. "Hey. Where'd you go?" "Just needed some air," he said. "Coffee run." She looked at him, brow furrowed. "You okay?" "Yeah. Just a little restless." She held up the tablet. "There's a report on here about a break-in over in East Boulder. No forced entry. No sign of robbery. But the couple who lived there, completely vanished." Ethan's blood froze. "When?" "Last night. Around the same time we were on the road." He took a step closer. "Names?" She turned the screen. It was a stock image of a smiling family, man, woman, 2 kids. Underneath, the headline read, "Boulder family disappears without a trace. Police say house, too clean, to be a crime scene." Ethan stared at the photo, his stomach churning. Rachel set the tablet down. "Something's going on, Ethan. And I know you're not telling me everything." He didn't answer. "Not yet." Ethan stared at Rachel in silence, her eyes waiting, expecting something, anything, that would make sense of the growing tension between them. She knew something was wrong, and despite his best efforts to shield her, the cracks were widening. He glanced at the motel room door, then at the window. The cheap curtains were shut tight, but the sunlight pressing through the fabric reminded him that the outside world was still moving, unaware of the quiet chaos seeping into their lives. Rachel stood and crossed her arms. "You're hiding something. I can see it all over you. Ever since that cop stopped us, you've been jumpy, distant, your phone's off, you left early without saying a word, and now you're acting like a stranger." Ethan lowered his head, then walked to the table and sat down. He rubbed his temples, gathering the courage to speak without revealing too much. "I don't know everything yet," he said quietly. "But something's not right. I need you to trust me." Rachel's voice was tight. That only works when the other person doesn't feel like a walking time bomb. He opened his mouth to respond, but stopped. Anything he said would either sound like a lie or a weak attempt to protect her. And maybe it was both. But right now, the less she knew, the safer she was. Rachel grabbed her phone from the nightstand and tried to power it on. Nothing happened. "What did you do to my phone?" "I disabled it. Just for now." "You what?" Her voice rose. "Why would you, Ethan? This isn't protecting me. This is making it worse." He stood again and stepped toward her. "Rachel, please. Just a little more time. I need to figure this out. I promise I'll tell you everything as soon as I can." She stared at him, furious but afraid. And underneath the fear, hurt. He knew this was the point where trust could begin to crack beyond repair. But if the people behind this were capable of invading their home, sending manipulated emails, and warning them off their own lives, then they were dealing with something far more dangerous than either of them had faced before. She finally turned away, biting back whatever words were forming. "You have until tonight," she said coldly. "Then I want answers." Ethan nodded, even though he didn't know if he could keep that promise. While Rachel took a shower, Ethan opened the burner phone Marcus had given him. There was one new message. Trace started. "You won't like it. Email me the house IP. Mask it with static. Watch for bounce backs." Ethan typed quickly, entering the router's last known static IP, along with the signal signature from their home firewall. Marcus had taught him long ago how to bury an access trace behind digital noise, a trick from their days monitoring foreign surveillance. He hoped it was enough. Seconds later, the phone vibrated again. "Someone rerouted all your camera feeds through a dummy node in Nevada. Doesn't belong to any ISP. Corporate shell, probably government tied. That's not just spying. That's possession. Possession. Ethan closed the phone and sat down hard on the edge of the bed. Rachel came out of the bathroom, wrapped in a towel. She glanced at him, still guarded, then reached for her clothes. He turned to her. Let's go out for lunch. Get some air. Clear our heads. She looked at him skeptically. Are you serious? Yeah. Somewhere open. Public. Let's just pretend for a bit. She didn't respond right away. Then, to his surprise, she nodded. Fine. They left the motel around noon, heading for a small cafe just off Pearl Street. It was quiet, not crowded. Ethan chose a table near the window, with a clear view of both exits. Rachel ordered a salad and iced tea. He barely touched his sandwich. As she stirred her drink, she asked again, "Do you think someone's after us?" Ethan didn't answer immediately. He watched the door, then leaned in slightly. Would you believe me if I said yes? Rachel set her fork down slowly. Are you saying they bugged our house? He nodded once. She sat back in disbelief. How? Why? I don't know. Not yet. But someone had full access. Emails, video feeds, audio. Everything. Rachel's face turned pale. What did they want? I think it has something to do with your work. She blinked. My work? You told me about that woman who disappeared, Vanessa. You said she had concerns about the clinical trials. Rachel nodded slowly, then whispered, Yeah, but I didn't get involved. I just heard rumors. Are you sure about that? She frowned. What do you mean? Ethan looked around before continuing. Is there anything on your work computer, or anything you've touched, that connects you to her complaints? Emails, files, reports, anything? Rachel's face shifted. She looked away, then back at him. There was something. A spreadsheet. She sent it to me by mistake, or maybe on purpose. Data from the South Haven trials. The mortality rates were wrong. I deleted it. I thought it was just noise. Ethan leaned in. Did you open it on your work machine? Yes. Did you ever download it? She paused. Just once. Briefly. Then I deleted it. He nodded grimly. Then someone knows. And they're trying to make sure no one else ever does. Rachel's voice dropped to a whisper. Are we in danger? Ethan didn't answer. By the time they left the cafe, the sunlight had grown harsher, and the shadows on the sidewalk felt deeper than before. Ethan scanned the street, then guided Rachel quickly back to the car. Inside, she turned to him. So what now? He gripped the steering wheel, then looked at her. I need to go back to the house. Rachel's eyes widened. Are you insane? Not inside. Just near it. I need to see if there's anything left. A clue. Something we missed. Marcus is tracking the feeds, but if they've wiped the physical evidence, we won't have anything. You think someone's been in our house and left no trace? I think someone's still watching it, hoping we come back. Rachel's breath caught. Then don't go. I have to. And I need you to go somewhere else. Her mouth opened in protest, but he cut her off. There's a coworker of mine, Jenna. She lives near Nederland. She's out of town, but her cabin is empty. I can drive you there. You'll be off the grid. No phone, no Wi-Fi. Nothing. Rachel hesitated, torn between defiance and fear. Finally, she asked, And you? I'll go back to the city. One quick stop. In and out. She exhaled slowly. Okay. But if you're not back by tonight, I will be. They didn't speak again for the rest of the drive. Ethan dropped her off at the secluded cabin, a modest A-frame buried deep in pine trees. He showed her how to operate the wood stove, left her the burner phone, and told her not to answer any knock at the door, ever. Then he drove back toward Boulder alone, the city growing larger in the windshield with every mile. The road home stretched ahead like a wire pulled taut, humming with something he couldn't name. Whatever he found at the house, it would change everything. Ethan approached his neighborhood just before sunset. The streets looked the same, trimmed lawns, sprinklers clicking on automatic timers, kids riding bikes down the sidewalks, but everything felt hollow. The silence here wasn't peaceful. It was calculated. The kind of quiet you find just before a storm breaks. He parked 2 blocks away and walked the rest of the distance on foot, his hoodie pulled low, sunglasses on despite the fading light. If anyone had eyes on the property, he didn't want to give them an easy target. The house came into view slowly, familiar yet foreign. Lights off. Curtains drawn. It could have been any suburban home, but Ethan knew better. He didn't go to the front door. Instead, he slipped around the side, crouching low behind the fence until he reached the back patio. The gate creaked slightly as he eased it open. His heart pounded, not with fear, but with focus. He couldn't afford fear now. The sliding door was locked, as expected. He reached under the potted plant beside the grill, retrieving the old backup key Rachel always insisted on keeping there. He hesitated for a moment. Then, in one fluid motion, he unlocked the door and stepped inside. The air was still. Too still. He stood in the kitchen, taking everything in. Nothing was out of place. No broken glass, no signs of forced entry. The fruit bowl on the counter had a couple of overripe bananas, just like they'd left it. The dishwasher light blinked idle. It was a perfect scene, too perfect. He pulled out his phone and sent a short message to Marcus, inside. Nothing visible. Starting sweep. The reply came within seconds, running ghost scan. Watch for residual signal trails. If it looks too clean, it probably is. Ethan moved carefully through the house, checking corners, closets, crawl spaces. He avoided turning on any lights. Every shadow was a potential hiding spot. The upstairs hallway felt the heaviest. As he neared the master bedroom, a flicker of light caught his eye. The screen of Rachel's work laptop was on. He froze. That computer should have been off. Rachel hadn't even brought it with them on the trip to Fort Collins. He stepped closer, squinting at the glowing screen. An email draft was open. No address. No subject line. But in the body of the message, one line blinked in a clean, sans serif font. I warned you once. The second time, there won't be words. The cursor blinked steadily. He didn't touch the laptop. Didn't breathe. His eyes scanned the screen for any signs of recording software or hidden access tools. The laptop fan was off. No network activity, no movement, just the eerie, open draft. Ethan pulled out the burner and took a photo. Then he messaged Marcus again. Open email draft. No login. Says, I warned you once. Marcus replied, back out. Someone's using the machine as bait. They want interaction, possibly keystroke traps or biometric trigger. Ethan moved backward slowly, leaving the computer untouched. But something else caught his attention on the desk. A thumb drive, half inserted into the USB port. He didn't remember seeing that drive before. It wasn't Rachel's. And they didn't leave it there. He pulled out a tissue from his pocket and gently removed the drive without touching it directly, slipping it into a zippered pouch in his jacket. He didn't connect it. Didn't even check what was on it. That would be for Marcus, somewhere safe. He backed out of the room and closed the door. As he passed the hallway camera, he paused. The small indicator light blinked red. It was recording. But something was off. The angle. He reached up and adjusted it slightly, only then realizing that someone had already repositioned it days earlier. The hallway footage from the night before flashed in his mind. The figure in the dark. His own jacket. Whoever had been inside the house hadn't come to steal or destroy. They had come to leave things. To seed messages. To push him closer to something, or push him away. Back downstairs, he paused near the entryway. A single envelope lay on the floor near the front door, perfectly aligned with the doormat. No address. No stamp. Just one word, handwritten across the front in red ink, Rachel. He didn't open it. Not there. He slipped it into the same inner pouch as the thumb drive, then checked the front yard through the peephole. No movement. No lights. Just the streetlight humming faintly across the road. He slipped out through the back again, locking the door behind him, and moved quickly to his car. Once inside, he drove several blocks away before pulling over at a gas station. Under the harsh yellow lights of the pump canopy, he opened the envelope. Inside was a single photo. Rachel. Standing at a crosswalk downtown. Smiling at something off camera. The timestamp in the bottom corner was from 5 days ago. The second item was a list. 3 names. He recognized none of them. But beside each name was a date. 1 week ago. 3 days ago. Yesterday. Each one had been crossed out. Below the last crossed out name was a blank line. And under it, in the same red ink, "Don't let her be next." Ethan stared at the photo, his mind racing. Whoever left this wanted him to know Rachel was being watched. And if those names were victims, or targets, then the implication was horrifying. He sent Marcus a message, "Got a photo. Rachel. Surveillance shot. List of names. Dates. Threat implied. Sending images now." Marcus replied, "Run. You're not just a witness anymore. You're a variable." The message hit harder than any of the others. Not a target. Not an observer. A variable. That meant someone hadn't decided what to do with him yet. Which meant the window for escape, or action, was rapidly closing. He called Rachel from the burner. When she picked up, her voice was raw. "Ethan? Hey. It's me. Listen, I need you to stay inside the cabin. Don't go outside for any reason." There was silence. "What happened?" "I can't explain over the phone. Just, lock the doors. Close the curtains. I'll be back soon." "Ethan, you're scaring me." "I know. But I need you to trust me. Just a little longer." She was quiet for a moment, then said, "Okay. But please come back. Don't disappear on me." "I won't." He ended the call and sat for a long moment in the driver's seat, his hands gripping the wheel. The laptop. The email. The drive. The photo. The list. It wasn't just surveillance anymore. It was manipulation. Pressure. Control. Someone was forcing him to make a choice. Reveal himself, or lose Rachel. But Ethan knew one thing for certain now. They weren't just watching. They were setting the stage. The night stretched long and cold as Ethan drove back into the mountains, the narrow road winding upward between thick lines of pine and shadow. His thoughts raced, yet his focus remained razor-sharp. The envelope, the photograph, the drive, all of it felt like pieces of a puzzle deliberately placed within reach, as though someone wanted him to follow a specific path, without knowing where it led. He arrived at the cabin just after 10 o'clock. It was nearly pitch black, the only light a faint glow coming from the window beside the door. He parked a few yards away and approached on foot, moving slowly, checking the surrounding woods for signs of movement or light. Nothing. Just the sound of crickets and distant wind through the trees. When he knocked twice, Rachel opened the door immediately. Her eyes were wide with relief and fear, the kind that builds during long hours of waiting with too many unanswered questions. "Come in," she whispered. Ethan stepped inside, locking the door behind him. The cabin smelled of wood smoke and pine, cozy and quiet, but the tension in the air was unmistakable. "I didn't leave," Rachel said. "Not once." "Good. We're not safe yet." Rachel stepped back as he shed his jacket, watching him closely. "What did you find?" He hesitated. "More than I wanted. But not enough." She followed him into the main room. The fireplace had gone cold, and only a single lamp lit the space. Ethan dropped the envelope on the table, opened it, and laid out the contents: the photo of her, the list with 3 names, the empty line. She leaned over it slowly. Her face went pale. "What is this?" "They've been following you," he said. "At least since last week. Maybe longer. That photo was taken 5 days ago. Someone wanted me to see it. To understand what happens if I don't act." Rachel stared at the list. "Who are these people?" "I don't know yet. But they're crossed out. Like they were targets. All gone." She looked at the blank line. "You think that's me?" He nodded. She sat down heavily. "Why? Why me? I didn't do anything. I think it's what you might do that scares them." She closed her eyes. "The spreadsheet. The trial data. Exactly. You saw too much. And even if you deleted it, it marked you. Someone, maybe more than one person, saw that file pass through your system. And now they're not taking chances." Rachel opened her eyes slowly. "So what do we do?" Ethan pulled the thumb drive from his jacket pocket and placed it on the table. "This was left in your laptop. I didn't touch it. I think it's bait. But it could also be a key. Either way, I'm sending it to Marcus." He moved to the corner of the room and opened his backpack. From inside, he pulled a small satellite modem, no larger than a paperback book, and powered it on. The device connected silently, bypassing all local networks. He inserted the drive into an isolated tablet and watched the screen flicker to life. A file directory opened, dozens of folders, each labeled with alphanumeric codes and timestamps. No context. No structure. "Encrypted," he muttered. "But the structure looks familiar." Rachel leaned closer. "What is it?" Ethan shook his head. "Can't tell yet. Could be financial records, patient data, communications. Whatever it is, someone left it in your laptop for a reason." He started compressing the contents into a secure packet and transferred it to Marcus through the modem. Once the upload completed, he messaged, "Package sent. Let me know if it's booby-trapped." Marcus replied within 2 minutes, "Got it. Already running Sandbox. Early files reference South Haven. This might be the smoking gun." Ethan felt his pulse quicken. They were covering their tracks, but someone left this trail on purpose. Maybe that trooper. Maybe someone inside the company. Rachel folded her arms. "But why leave it for us to find? Maybe we're the only ones who'll act. Or maybe, he thought but didn't say, we're the fall guys. The ones meant to carry the evidence until it's convenient to silence us." Before he could say more, the light in the cabin dimmed for a split second. Not a total outage, just a flicker. Then it returned. Rachel looked around. What was that? Ethan stood quickly, scanning the walls. The cabin had no smart systems, no connection to the outside world. Power came from an off-grid generator. The modem was off. Phones were off. There shouldn't be any interference. He grabbed a flashlight and moved to the window, pushing the curtain aside. The forest was still. He checked the generator. No issues. Then, just as he turned back toward the door, Rachel screamed. He rushed inside. She was standing in the middle of the room, staring at the ceiling. One of the smoke detectors was blinking, fast, erratic. A pattern Ethan didn't recognize. He climbed onto the chair and unscrewed the casing. Inside, tucked beside the battery, was a small device, metallic, with a red diode that blinked in perfect rhythm. He yanked it out and dropped it into a metal tin he used for signal jamming. Then he turned to Rachel. "That's not part of the smoke detector." Her voice was shaking. "So they've been here? Or they're still here?" He moved through the cabin quickly, checking every door, every crawl space, every blind corner. No one. No signs of forced entry. The cabin was too isolated for someone to sneak in unnoticed, or so he had thought. Back in the main room, Rachel was seated on the floor, knees pulled to her chest. "They can get to us anywhere, can't they?" she whispered. Ethan nodded. "If we stay reactive, yes. But we're going to stop reacting. We start moving on our own terms." He retrieved the tin and placed it in a lead-lined case, then powered up the burner again. Marcus's message had just come in. "That drive is big. Real records. Pharma trials, payouts, NDAs. Your wife's email shows up in 2 chains. She was flagged." Ethan replied, "Can you trace who accessed her computer?" The answer came seconds later: "1 account. Admin override. Used 3 days ago. Internal ID cross-references to a user who doesn't exist in any HR logs. Alias, T. Valen." Ethan stared at the name. "Valen." Rachel looked up. "What?" He showed her the message. She shook her head. "I've never heard that name before." "Neither have I. But if they had admin access, they could plant anything. Fake anything. And use it later to frame you." Rachel's eyes were wide. "They're building a case. Against me. Or both of us." He stood, moving back toward the door. "We can't stay here. We need to leave tonight. Head east. Somewhere no one expects." Rachel didn't argue. While she packed, Ethan stared at the tin containing the listening device. They hadn't just been watching. They had been inside the cabin, watching her while she was alone. Waiting for him to return. It wasn't about information anymore. It was pressure. A slow tightening of the noose. And now, they knew it was coming. But so did he. They left the cabin just after midnight, driving without headlights for the first half-mile until they reached a paved access road that led east, away from the mountains and deeper into the backcountry. Ethan drove while Rachel sat beside him, hunched forward, arms wrapped around her midsection, eyes flicking back to the rearview mirror every few seconds. Neither of them spoke until the forest thinned and the empty highway stretched out in front of them like a dark, endless ribbon. Ethan broke the silence. "We're going to see Marcus. In person this time." Rachel's voice was quiet but firm. "Where is he?" "He moves around. Right now, he's set up in a mobile unit out past Sterling. Old RV with military-grade gear inside. Off-grid, encrypted, constantly on the move." She nodded, not asking how Ethan knew that. He figured she'd already accepted that he had more ties to his old life than he ever talked about. After 2 hours of steady driving, they turned off the highway onto a narrow, gravel path that wound through an abandoned industrial zone. Faded billboards loomed out of the darkness, and derelict silos stood like ghosts from a forgotten era. At the edge of the lot was a single vehicle, an aging RV that looked barely functional from the outside. A dull green light glowed from within. Ethan parked, stepped out, and approached the side door. Before he could knock, it opened. Marcus stood there, barefoot, wearing a thermal shirt and holding a steaming mug of black coffee. He nodded once and stepped aside. "Get in." They climbed into a surprisingly organized interior, rows of monitors mounted across the far wall, a narrow bench lined with file folders, and a ceiling dotted with cables and signal dampeners. The air smelled like solder and burnt plastic. Rachel stood awkwardly near the door while Ethan slid into a seat near the primary terminal. Marcus gestured toward the far end of the RV. "There's tea on the stove. Might still be warm." She nodded silently and moved to pour herself a cup. Ethan leaned forward. What did you find? Marcus turned the main monitor toward him and tapped the screen. Let me start with the thumb drive. It's real. Authentic logs, raw data files, project notes. Dozens of patient IDs, most of them linked to the South Haven trials. And this, he pointed to a document file, is what really matters. Ethan scanned the page. Signed confessions? Internal memos between two executives at Darnell-Meyer, confirming they knew about the adverse effects of the drug under development, called C412. The drug was fast-tracked through early trials, but side effects were suppressed in the official data. Your wife's name appears in a side chain where one of the researchers recommended involving compliance. She never responded, but her system logged the email. That's all it took. Ethan ran a hand over his face. So they think she's a liability. She is, Marcus said. To them. Rachel returned with her tea, her eyes locked on the screen. You said the data is authentic? Marcus nodded. Without a doubt. And encrypted with an algorithm that matches the company's internal backup routines. This was taken from inside. Rachel sat slowly. Then someone wanted it to get out. That's the question. Marcus pulled up another screen. The real kicker is this, the fake admin account that accessed her machine? It's not just a ghost. It was created from an IP that matches a network used by a consulting firm in DC, a shell front for a defense contractor called Lassarian Group. I traced 5 signals from that node in the last 48 hours. One of them pinged your house. Another pinged the cabin you stayed at. Ethan stiffened. So they're military? Not officially. They're privatized. Off-books work. Surveillance, asset extraction, data silencing. They don't move without high-level permission. Rachel leaned in. Are we being hunted by contractors? Yes, Marcus said. But I don't think they're after you yet. They're watching. Waiting to see what you'll do. If you vanish, they scrub you quietly. If you go public, they use what they've planted to discredit or destroy you. Ethan's voice was low. What did they plant? Marcus pulled up another image. A forged email chain. Dated 3 days ago. Sent from your personal account to a known investigative journalist. It contains falsified trial data, much of it correct, but also laced with fabricated numbers and inflammatory accusations. Ethan's stomach turned. So if I try to leak the real data, they'll say you're pushing fake documents. Rachel's hands were shaking. This is bigger than just us. They're building a narrative. Marcus nodded. Exactly. They want to control not just the truth, but the perception of the truth. Ethan leaned back, staring at the ceiling. So what's the play? Marcus stood, walked to the far end of the RV, and returned with a small metallic case. He placed it on the table and opened it. Inside were 3 burner phones, a GPS tracker, and a sealed USB drive. This, he said, goes to someone who already suspects what's happening. I know a reporter, Trina Wells. She's been chasing Darnell-Meyer for years but never had enough to go public. You give her this, and she'll know what to do. Ethan frowned. Why hasn't she been silenced? She's protected. Too visible. And too clean. If anything happens to her, it'll draw attention. But she won't move without ironclad proof. Ethan looked at Rachel. She gave a small nod. Marcus continued. While you deliver the package, I'll trace the Lassarian node. If we can prove government ties, we can leverage pressure through independent watchdog groups. Rachel spoke, her voice trembling but determined. What if they come after us anyway? Then you disappear, Marcus said. Completely. New identities. New lives. But if this works, you might not have to. Ethan took the case and stood. Where is she? Portland. She's speaking at a conference tomorrow. It's your best shot to catch her face to face. And safer than a digital handoff. Rachel stood with him. We'll go together. Marcus raised an eyebrow. That makes you more visible. I don't care. I'm not hiding anymore. Ethan looked at her. Are you sure? She nodded. They came into our home. Into our lives. They're not going to get to rewrite this story without a fight. Marcus smirked. Then you'd better hit the road now. As they left the RV, dawn was beginning to lighten the horizon. The world outside still looked ordinary, peaceful, unremarkable. But they now knew what hid beneath the surface. Layers of control, fear, and deception, each more carefully constructed than the last. And for the first time, Ethan felt something shift, not just the fear or the pressure. But resolve. They weren't just running anymore. They were fighting back. The road to Portland cut through open plains and winding forest highways, long stretches of silence broken only by the hum of tires on asphalt. Rachel kept her eyes fixed on the scenery, though Ethan knew her mind was far from the passing trees. The metal case containing the USB drive from Marcus sat between them in the center console, its presence a heavy reminder of the stakes they carried. Ethan checked the dashboard clock. They had just under 7 hours before Trina Wells was scheduled to speak at the conference. Marcus had given them press credentials to get through security, falsified, but detailed enough to pass casual inspection. The plan was simple: locate her during the event, hand over the drive in person, and disappear before anyone noticed they were there. But simple plans rarely stayed that way. They stopped only once, at a remote gas station near the state line. As Ethan filled the tank, Rachel went inside to grab coffee. When she returned, she looked pale. "What's wrong?" he asked. She handed him her phone. On the screen was a breaking news alert from a Denver-based media outlet. Fugitive couple wanted in data breach, pharmaceutical firm blames criminal hackers for compromised systems. Below the headline was a blurry security camera photo of Ethan and Rachel walking into a motel 2 days earlier. The article quoted a spokesperson from Darnell Meyer Labs claiming that the company's data servers had been illegally accessed by 2 former employees under suspicion of corporate espionage. Rachel, who had never technically been an employee, only a contractor through a compliance agency, was named explicitly. "They're flipping the narrative," Ethan muttered. Rachel's voice shook. "They're making us the criminals." He tossed the phone into the glove compartment. "Let them. We're almost there." They drove the final stretch in silence, arriving at the convention center mid-morning. The building was massive, glass panels reflecting the sky, banners hanging from every side advertising global health innovation and ethical research. Irony, Ethan thought, had never looked so polished. Inside, the crowd was dense but organized. Doctors, scientists, journalists, and corporate reps mingled beneath vaulted ceilings and informational kiosks. Rachel kept her head down as they moved through the main lobby toward the East Wing, where Trina Wells was scheduled to present. They arrived 10 minutes before her panel. Security guards flanked the entrance, scanning badges and checking IDs. Ethan handed over their passes, heart pounding. The guard glanced at them, then at the badges, and waved them through without a word. They slipped into the back of the room just as Trina began to speak. She was poised, mid-40s, her dark curls pulled back tightly, her tone sharp and articulate. She spoke of the ethical failures in modern clinical research, the blurred lines between public health and profit, and the increasing role of corporate surveillance in silencing dissent. Her words resonated deeply with the room, and with Ethan. When the panel ended, the crowd erupted in polite applause. Trina stepped down from the stage and began moving toward the hallway, flanked by 2 aides. Ethan and Rachel followed, careful not to draw attention. Just as she reached the exit, Ethan called out, "Trina! A moment?" She turned, already dismissing them, but paused when she saw the look in his eyes. "We need to speak," Ethan said, keeping his voice low. "Somewhere private." Her gaze sharpened. "Who are you?" Ethan reached into his jacket, pulled out the USB drive, and held it up just enough for her to see. "We have what you've been looking for." South Haven, C412, and more. She studied him for a long moment, then nodded toward a side corridor. One of her aides tried to follow, but she waved him off. 10 minutes, she said. In a utility room near the service elevators, Trina crossed her arms and faced them. Talk. Ethan handed her the drive. This contains internal files from Darnell Meyer Labs. Real names. Real trials. Real deaths. We didn't steal it. Someone on the inside wanted it out. Trina plugged the drive into a secured tablet she kept in her bag. The screen flashed briefly, then began loading the directory. As she scrolled through the folders, her expression changed. Her fingers stopped on one file, marked simply, Project Verity, Internal Dossier. She tapped it open. Inside were hundreds of documents. Personnel logs, financial transfers, scanned handwritten notes, audio transcripts of closed-door meetings. The depth of information was staggering. But one folder, labeled L Subject Recordings, made her pause. What's this? She asked. Ethan shrugged. We didn't open everything. Trina clicked through. A list of 10-digit file names appeared, each marked with a corresponding date. She opened one. Audio crackled to life. A man's voice, tired, trembling, spoke into the recorder. This is patient designation L073. Date is July 10th. My dosage was doubled yesterday. I wasn't informed until after the symptoms started. They said I signed a consent form, but I never saw one. I can't sleep. I can't think. I see people who aren't there. Rachel's face turned pale. Trina closed the file. Jesus. She scrolled to the next. Another voice. Then another. Some begged for help. Some wept. One simply breathed heavily for several minutes before the recording cut out. Trina looked up. These aren't just whistleblowers. These are the test subjects. Rachel whispered, they weren't supposed to exist. The official reports claimed all subjects were anonymous volunteers under strict medical supervision. Trina backed out of the folder and opened another titled, Financial Offsets. What appeared were tables of wire transfers, millions funneled through shell companies to government liaisons, hospitals, and private security firms. One name jumped out at Ethan, Lissarian Group. Trina's voice was ice. You know what this means? Ethan nodded. It means the company didn't just lie. They paid to erase the truth. They bought silence. And now they're hunting us to make sure this data never surfaces. She pulled the drive and placed it back in her bag. You did the right thing bringing this to me. But we're out of time. Once they know this file left your hands, they'll move faster. Rachel stepped forward. What do we do now? Trina looked at them both. Disappear. Tonight. Leave everything behind. I'll publish this in 24 hours. I'll go public, and once it's out, you'll be safer. But until then, they'll assume you're still a threat. Ethan hesitated. And if they get to you? Trina smiled grimly. They won't. I've been preparing for this longer than you think. She slipped out the back of the room, vanishing into the conference crowd before they could say another word. Ethan and Rachel exited through a side entrance and circled the building on foot. They reached their car just as a black SUV turned the corner onto the street. It slowed. The windows were tinted. Rachel's breath caught. Is that them? Ethan didn't wait to find out. He floored the gas and pulled into traffic, disappearing into the city. The dossier had been delivered. But the hunt had only just begun. The sun had set by the time Ethan pulled the car onto a winding back road that led out of Portland. He kept the headlights off for as long as he could, using the moonlight and memory to guide them away from the main routes. Rachel sat beside him in silence, her fingers clenched tight around the seatbelt strap. Neither of them had spoken since they spotted the black SUV circling the conference center. Every time Ethan glanced at the rearview mirror, he expected to see it there again, waiting. But the road behind them stayed empty. After nearly 2 hours of driving through the outskirts, they pulled into a hidden forest road that Marcus had marked on an encrypted map days before. A disused ranger station sat at the end of the trail, camouflaged by dense overgrowth and erosion. Ethan parked behind the building, doused the engine, and finally let out a long breath. Inside, the station was bare but solid: cement walls, a wood-burning stove, a shortwave radio rigged with basic encryption, and a solar-powered generator humming quietly in the corner. Marcus had arranged for it to be stocked with supplies. It wasn't comfortable, but it was hidden. Rachel slumped into a folding chair and finally broke the silence. "Do you think she made it out?" Ethan nodded. "Trina's smart. She knew the risk. She's been planning for that moment longer than we've even known what was happening. She's the only one left who can stop them now." "No," Ethan turned from the window and looked her in the eye. "We are." Rachel didn't respond, but the exhaustion in her face shifted slightly, into something firmer. A trace of steel beneath the surface. He powered on the radio and connected to Marcus's frequency. Static buzzed for a moment before a familiar voice cut through. "Package delivered?" Ethan keyed the mic, handed it off to Wells. "Full exposure is coming." "Good. You've triggered movement." "I've got chatter." There's a ripple in internal comms from Lassarian. They're scrambling, trying to find where the leak started. They haven't confirmed you're out of the loop, but it won't take long. What do we do in the meantime? Sit tight. I've got something. You're not going to like it. There was a pause, then the signal cracked again. Your name showed up in an internal memo from Darnell Meyer's risk mitigation team. One of the attachments wasn't scrubbed properly. It included metadata linking to a contact listed as Doyle M. "Ethan, you remember that name?" Ethan's stomach turned. "Major Doyle Morgan?" "Yeah. Your old commanding officer." Rachel sat up straighter. "You served under him?" "Briefly. Afghanistan. He handled recon logistics and managed special liaisons with private security." Marcus continued. "After he left the army, he signed on with, you guessed it, Lassarian. His clearance gave him access to experimental protocols for tech civilian coordination. Off-grid operations. Extraction programs. This guy isn't just another bureaucrat, he's the one tying Darnell Meyer to government shielding." Rachel asked, "So what's the connection to us?" Marcus replied, "That's the part you won't like. The data breach report, the one that names you both?" Doyle submitted it. Ethan felt the floor shift under him. He's the one authorizing the manhunt. He's more than that. His name is tied to a classified budget line labeled Operation Rend. 4 years old. Never made it to oversight. But the goals are clear: protect biomedical partnerships deemed essential to national health interests by any means necessary. Rachel muttered, "And we're the loose ends." Marcus didn't respond. Ethan leaned back, staring at the ceiling. "We need to find him." "Already working on it," Marcus said. "He travels under a false identity now, Miles Dayton. Last spotted at a black tie event in Seattle 2 days ago. I'm trying to pull itinerary data. If we can intercept him, get him talking." Ethan finished the sentence. "We expose everything." Rachel asked, "What if he's not the one pulling the strings?" "Then he's still close enough to get us to whoever is." Marcus sent one final message before signing off for the night: "Rest. You'll move tomorrow." After shutting down the radio, Ethan lit the stove and made tea while Rachel organized their bags. It was a quiet kind of coordination between them, no need for extra words. The bond that had formed during these past days, of shared fear, decisions made in the dark, and truths uncovered one breath at a time, was stronger than any fear they had left. Later, Ethan couldn't sleep. He stood outside, wrapped in a jacket, staring up at the cloud-covered sky. Somewhere beyond those clouds was a world still moving, still unaware of what they'd uncovered. He couldn't help but wonder how many other lives had been manipulated, erased, framed in the name of protection. He thought about Doyle Morgan, the man who once shook his hand after a mission gone wrong, who once told him, "Some things aren't meant to make sense. You just follow orders and live long enough to regret them." He never trusted Doyle. And now he knew why. Rachel stepped beside him, her arms crossed. "I keep thinking about that list," she said softly. Ethan didn't need her to specify. "The one in the envelope." The names crossed out. The line left blank. She looked at him. What if this whole time we weren't the targets? What if we were the test? He turned to her slowly. "What do you mean?" "They plant the file. They wait to see if we'll run. If we'll leak it. If we'll fold. Maybe they've done it before, and maybe every time someone folds, they end up crossed off." Ethan considered it. The possibility that their escape, their resistance, wasn't unexpected at all, but part of a measured system. Triggers, traps, outcomes recorded. "If we're the variable," Rachel said, "then someone's watching the experiment." He looked toward the woods. "Then let's make sure they don't like the results." The next morning, Marcus sent new coordinates. Doyle, alias Miles Dayton, was attending a closed-door meeting at a private estate north of Redmond. No formal agenda. No press. Just a list of high-value attendees from government and biotech sectors. Marcus added a note, "There's a chance to intercept him outside the compound. His security is tight, but his driver is old school, uses analog radios. I've got a listening device nearby." Ethan turned to Rachel. "We make contact, we get a confession, we pass it to Trina, along with the rest of the dossier." Rachel nodded. "And if he doesn't talk?" Ethan's expression darkened. "Then we make sure the whole world sees what silence looks like." Their final move was coming. Not just for their own freedom, but to make the truth undeniable. The sun had barely risen when Ethan and Rachel left the ranger station, heading east toward Redmond. The terrain shifted from forested hills to wide, open plains, the highway empty except for occasional freight trucks heading in the opposite direction. Ethan drove with both hands on the wheel, his eyes locked on the road ahead, but the silence in the car felt heavier than the tension surrounding the mission. Rachel sat upright, but her body was turned slightly away from him, her eyes fixed on the horizon. Her mind was clearly elsewhere. Since the previous night's discussion, Ethan had felt her growing more distant, more guarded, not because of fear, but because of what she hadn't yet said. They'd spent days running from external threats, from people with guns and networks and false narratives, but the truth was, something had been brewing between them too. Something unspoken. And he knew he couldn't keep going without facing it. "You've been quiet," Ethan said, his voice calm but firm. Rachel didn't look at him. "So have you. I think we're past the point of playing it safe." She turned to him slowly. "You really want to do this now?" "Yes," he said. "Because if we're walking into something that could end tonight, I need to know what's between us." Rachel sat back in her seat, arms crossed. The silence stretched for several seconds before she finally answered. "I've been thinking about Vanessa," she said. "The one who disappeared." Ethan glanced at her. "The coworker?" She nodded. "She was more than that. We weren't close, but she trusted me. She gave me that spreadsheet, Ethan. The one I told you I deleted? I didn't delete it. Not right away." He tightened his grip on the wheel but said nothing. "I looked through it for hours. I saw the numbers, the test phases, the flag trial groups. I saw the anomaly reports from South Haven, the real ones. And I knew. I knew what it meant." Her voice was steady, but her hands had begun to tremble. "I didn't say anything. I didn't report it. I didn't even respond to her message. I got scared. I archived the file and convinced myself that it wasn't my problem. That it was above my pay grade." Ethan felt a familiar pressure building behind his ribs, the weight of something he didn't want to hear but knew he had to. "Rachel, I didn't tell you because I thought it would pass. I thought I could forget it. But then Vanessa vanished. Her badge was deactivated. Her office was emptied. They scrubbed her out like she'd never been there. And that's when I knew I'd made the wrong decision. Ethan slowed the car slightly as the curve of the road narrowed between two steep cliffs. You weren't the only one making decisions in fear, he said finally. She looked at him. What do you mean? He exhaled. 3 years ago, I was offered a contract job through a private firm, logistics consulting. High clearance. They routed everything through shell companies, but the pay was too good to question. And I didn't. For a year, I helped coordinate off-the-record transfers, funds, equipment, medical cargo. No questions asked. Rachel's eyes widened. You think it was tied to Darnell Meyer? I don't think. I know. One of the account codes I saw on the dossier last night, it matched an offshore fund I helped set up in Jakarta. He gripped the wheel harder, jaw clenched. I've been part of it this whole time. Not directly, not intentionally. But I helped build the very thing we're trying to take down. Rachel looked away, her voice nearly breaking. We were both complicit. Ethan pulled the car off the road into a rest stop overlook. The valley stretched below them, golden in the rising sun. The place was empty, just a few picnic tables and a broken vending machine. He turned off the engine and faced her fully. We didn't know then. But we know now. And that's why we're here. We can't fix what we did, Rachel. But we can make damn sure no one else ends up like Vanessa. She nodded, her eyes glistening but hard. Then no more secrets. Not from each other. No more, Ethan said. They sat in silence for a long moment. Then, Rachel reached into her backpack and pulled out a flash drive, different from the one they'd given Trina. Smaller. Older. She held it in her palm like a confession. I kept a copy, she said. Of Vanessa's original file. I hid it before we left. Ethan stared at it. Why? Because if Trina's drive gets intercepted or destroyed, we still have the evidence. The original. The proof that Vanessa was right, and that the company lied from the start. Ethan took the drive carefully and slipped it into the inner pocket of his coat. Then we hold the truth. Rachel looked him in the eyes. And we don't let it go. They got back on the road an hour later. The air between them had changed, not cleared, but stripped bare. What had once been suspicion, silence, and the weight of omission had become something sharper, cleaner. There was no room left for fear. Only purpose. By the time they reached Redmond, the information Marcus had sent earlier had updated with more detail. Doyle Morgan, Miles Dayton, was set to attend a closed-door strategy session at a secluded estate owned by one of Lassarian's top executives. The property was heavily surveilled and gated, with private security trained to deter any media or uninvited guests. But Marcus had given them something more. A schedule. At 3 o'clock in the afternoon, Doyle was set to be driven off-site to meet with an unnamed official at a small airstrip just outside of town. A brief window, maybe 10 minutes between transfer points, when he'd be away from tight security. Ethan and Rachel parked their rental car along a dirt access road a quarter mile from the strip. Marcus's drone had already mapped the perimeter, identifying weak spots in the fence line and the path Doyle's vehicle would take from the estate to the waiting aircraft. Ethan assembled a small audio capture unit, a directional mic with a high-sensitivity receiver, while Rachel checked the secondary flash drive one last time. If Doyle talked, they'd record it. If he didn't, they'd find another way to expose him. They took position behind a tree line overlooking the airstrip, watching the narrow road for signs of movement. The wind picked up, carrying dust and dry grass in swirling eddies. For a moment, it was easy to forget the stakes. Then, the black SUV appeared on the horizon. Ethan and Rachel crouched low as it pulled into the clearing near the aircraft, followed by a smaller sedan carrying 2 bodyguards. Doyle stepped out of the SUV, dressed in a navy blazer, sunglasses, and the same posture Ethan remembered from years ago, rigid, commanding, detached. He looked older. Thinner. But not weaker. They watched as he spoke with the pilot, then turned toward the second car, alone. That was their chance. Ethan stood. Now. Rachel followed without hesitation. They moved down the slope fast and quiet, keeping low until they reached the side of the runway, no more than 20 yards from where Doyle stood. The wind muffled their approach. Ethan stepped forward and called out, his voice sharp and deliberate. "Doyle Morgan." Doyle turned slowly, surprised, but not startled. His eyes adjusted to Ethan's face, and then to Rachel beside him. "Ethan Miller," he said, as if reciting an old memory. "Didn't expect to see your name again. Let alone your face." Ethan held up the flash drive. "We know everything. South Haven. The trials. The payments. The cover-up. And we've already leaked half of it. This is just the insurance." Doyle gave a small, humorless smile. "And what do you want from me?" "The truth," Rachel said. "On record." Doyle looked at them both, and for a moment, something shifted in his expression. Not guilt. But recognition. "You think you're exposing something. But you're not. You're walking into a system designed to absorb truth and weaponize it." Ethan didn't lower his arm. "Talk. Or we make the rest public before you get on that plane." Doyle considered it. Then, finally, he nodded once. "Fine. But you won't like what I have to say." Doyle Morgan stood still as the wind whipped across the private airstrip, his blazer flapping lightly, the sleeve stretched tight against his arms as if trying to hold in whatever tension lived beneath his skin. He gave Ethan and Rachel a long, assessing look before motioning them toward the side of the vehicle, away from the other two guards, who hadn't yet noticed the sudden confrontation. Ethan slipped the directional mic into his jacket pocket, adjusting it so it captured every word. Rachel stood close beside him, her gaze sharp, unwavering. Doyle's jaw worked slightly, like he was chewing a thought. "I'm not going to give you a confession," he said. "At least not the kind you want." Ethan didn't blink. "Then give us what matters." Doyle glanced toward the jet, the pilot waiting with an engine idling. "The South Haven trials were never about medicine." "Not really. You think you've uncovered a pharmaceutical conspiracy, but what you found is just the shell." Rachel tilted her head. "The shell of what?" Doyle's voice dropped lower. "A test platform. Darnell Meyer was a front. Funded, directed, and audited by a private committee buried beneath a national health subagency you've never heard of. The trials weren't just drug-related. They were data-gathering experiments. Psychological. Behavioral. Sociopolitical." Ethan frowned. "Behavioral?" Doyle nodded. Subjects weren't evaluated for physiological response. They were monitored for decision-making, response to stress, compliance when faced with risk. Every reaction, from volunteers, staff, whistleblowers, even outside contractors like you, Rachel, was cataloged, analyzed. They weren't interested in who got better. They were interested in who would speak up. And what happened next? Rachel stepped forward. "They baited me. They baited all of you," Doyle said, calmly. "The leaked spreadsheet, the email anomalies, the planted drive in your house, they were all part of a layered system. Triggers. To see how individuals would react. Who would resist? Who would disappear? Who would fight?" Ethan couldn't contain the disbelief rising in his chest. "So all of this, the threats, the surveillance, the falsified news report." Doyle cut him off. "Controlled escalation. They wanted to see how far they could push you. How far you'd go to protect the truth. How many systems you'd use to fight back, and which ones you'd trust." Rachel whispered, "They used us as bait to test their own leak suppression model." Doyle didn't argue. "You're not the first. But you are, interesting." The word hit Ethan like a slap. People died. Doyle's expression didn't change. Some were acceptable losses. Some were necessary. Rachel's voice cracked with rage. Vanessa wasn't a variable. She was a human being. Doyle looked at her finally. And for the first time, something shifted. Regret, maybe. Or the ghost of it. She wasn't supposed to vanish. That part wasn't my call. Ethan stepped closer, his voice low and dangerous. Then who made that call? Doyle paused. Someone above me. I don't have a name. Only a file. It was passed to me under a private channel. Marked with a clearance code I couldn't verify. Ethan pulled out the secondary flash drive, the one with Vanessa's original file, and held it between 2 fingers. Then maybe this tells the rest of the story. Doyle looked at it but didn't reach for it. You don't understand what you're holding. Rachel shot back, that's because no one will tell us the truth. Doyle hesitated. Then, with a breath, he pulled out his phone, unlocked it, and handed it to Ethan. There's a folder in there. Encrypted. Labeled SCT Relay. It was copied to me from a secure drop point. Someone else created it. I never opened it. Ethan took the phone and began transferring the file to his own drive while the mic in his pocket captured every word. The recording was still going, the signal bouncing to Marcus, who was listening live from a safe house in northern Oregon. Rachel looked past Doyle toward the guards, who were beginning to take notice. We need to leave, she whispered. Doyle nodded. Then you need to hear this before I go. He leaned in closer, dropping his voice. The man who gave you that note, Carlson. The trooper. Rachel's heart stuttered. You know him? I recruited him. Ethan's eyes narrowed. Why? Because he was clean. Because he was loyal. Because I needed someone who could step outside protocol when it mattered. But he went rogue. Told me the threat to you was higher than reported. Said he was going to warn you himself. Rachel whispered, and then he vanished. Doyle nodded. He's not dead. But he's in hiding. Went off-grid 3 days ago. Burned his ID, emptied his accounts. Took something with him. What? A secondary dossier. The one that connects South Haven to 3 other field programs. He has it. Or he did. Last ping from his backup beacon came from a gas station outside Spokane. Then silence. Ethan felt the floor shift beneath his feet again. So he's the last link. Doyle nodded. And he's the only one who has names. Real ones. The kind that bring down systems. Rachel asked, and you? Why are you telling us this now? Doyle's voice was flat. Because whatever this experiment was meant to measure, it's already out of control. The variables are unstable. The parameters are failing. I'm not warning you. I'm defecting. He pulled a folded slip of paper from his blazer and handed it to Ethan. Coordinates. A time. If you find Carlson before they do, he'll give you everything. What about you? Rachel asked. Doyle looked toward the plane. I go where I can't be reached. I've done what I can. Before either of them could say another word, Doyle turned and walked back toward the SUV. The guards, now clearly alert, watched Ethan and Rachel but made no move to interfere. Doyle climbed into the vehicle, and seconds later, the SUV pulled toward the plane. Ethan and Rachel turned and ran for the tree line. Back in the car, Ethan sent a single message to Marcus with the coordinates. Marcus replied within seconds, got it. Sending drone and tracker. You'll have support. Rachel was pale, staring out the window. He knew all along. Ethan nodded. And he's not the only one. They drove in silence until they found a safe motel on the edge of the city. After securing the room and sweeping it with jamming devices Marcus had supplied, Ethan pulled out Doyle's phone and decrypted the transferred file. Inside was a report, 6 pages long, marked with redacted sections and handwritten annotations. But one line stood out. Carlson secured Subject V files and broke containment. Subject last cited under civilian identity, Art Miller. Ethan stared at it. Rachel read it twice, her face going blank. He turned to her slowly. "Rachel," he said, "what is this?" She said nothing. Then, quietly, "I think I know why they're after me." And just like that, the truth they thought they'd uncovered cracked open again. Deeper. Stranger. Far more dangerous than they had imagined. Rachel didn't speak for nearly 5 minutes after Ethan read aloud the phrase from the report, "Civilian identity, Art Miller." She sat on the edge of the motel bed, her hands clasped tightly, her jaw set as though preparing to endure a blow that hadn't yet landed. Outside, the wind rattled the window panes and carried the sound of distant freight trains cutting through the industrial edge of the city. The small, cheap room felt like a fragile shell around a truth that had been hidden too long. Ethan leaned against the dresser, arms folded, the decrypted file still glowing on his screen. The subject file was labeled Subject V, but nowhere in the folder did it explain what the designation meant, only that it was tied to Carlson's last retrieval, and somehow, to Rachel. "You knew something," Ethan said finally, not accusing, but with a weight she couldn't ignore. "You didn't say anything back at the airstrip." "Why?" Rachel exhaled, then looked up at him with eyes full of old fear. "Because I didn't believe it was real. Not until now." "Tell me." She nodded slowly, like she had already rehearsed it in her head many times, but had never found the right moment to let it out. "When I was 20, I signed up for a cognitive research study. It was supposed to be simple, non-invasive, behavioral questions, memory recall exercises. I was broke, living off scholarship money and microwave noodles. I didn't even ask who funded it." Ethan said nothing. Rachel continued, "It lasted for 6 months. Weekly sessions. At first, it was basic stuff, logic puzzles, reaction tests, emotional triggers. But toward the end, things changed. They started isolating us, removing our phones before each session. Then came the biometric scans. Memory manipulation exercises. Once, they kept me in a dark room for nearly 20 hours. No clock. No communication. Just white noise and light pulses." She took a shaky breath. "I thought it was a psychological stress test. I was told it was part of the process. But when the final session came, I showed up and the building was gone. Not empty, gone. Like it never existed." The address led to a construction site that had supposedly been vacant for over a year. Ethan's pulse quickened. "And you never followed up?" "I tried. No one I met in the sessions answered their phones again. I called the number on the consent form, it had been disconnected. I went to the university's research department, and they had no record of the trial. I convinced myself it was a scam. Weird, sure, but harmless. I buried it." Ethan walked across the room and sat beside her. "But it wasn't." "No," she whispered. "It wasn't." He picked up the decrypted file again. Carlson had labeled it with a tracking ID that Marcus could now attempt to locate in the central records. Marcus was already working on it, scanning government archives for overlapping project names. Ethan sent a message, "Rachel may have been part of something called Subject V. We need to know what that was." Marcus responded within minutes, pulling deep logs. "This is bad. Real bad. V doesn't stand for variable. It stands for viability." Ethan responded, "Viability of what?" The pause in Marcus's reply was longer this time. When the message finally came through, it was just one line. Subject V was a viability trial, testing long-term compliance and memory suppression in test candidates exposed to experimental neurochemical controls. Rachel wasn't a researcher. She was a result. Ethan turned the phone toward her. Rachel stared at the words, her breath growing shallow. "They used me," she said. "They turned me into something I didn't even understand. Then dropped me back into the world like nothing happened." Ethan took her hand. "That's why you were flagged. That's why Carlson tried to warn us. And it's why they're still chasing us, she said. Not for what I found, but for what I am. Marcus sent another message. Carlson uploaded a final packet to a dormant server. Coordinates embedded. The location is active, but if they intercept it before we get there, it's over. You need to go now. Ethan loaded the coordinates. It's a media station. Abandoned broadcast tower near Baker County. Remote. Underground bunker beneath it. Rachel stood. Let's go. The drive took them through empty desert roads and forgotten towns where gas stations had long since shut their doors. The tower came into view near dusk, a rusted spire rising out of scrubland, leaning slightly, as if surrendering to time. A fence surrounded the property, but half of it had collapsed. They left the car hidden in a ravine and approached on foot. The main building was dark, a broken security keypad blinking a lifeless red near the entrance. Ethan pushed the door open slowly, flashlight slicing through dust-heavy air. Inside was a narrow stairwell, leading down into what looked like a storm shelter. At the base, they found a reinforced door slightly ajar. Rachel pushed it open. The room inside was cold, metallic, humming faintly with power. In the center sat a black console with a flickering display. Carlson's name was listed in the access log. 3 days ago. On the screen, a video prompt awaited. Ethan hit play. Carlson appeared, disheveled, unshaven, eyes bloodshot. If you're seeing this, they haven't caught me yet. Or maybe they have. Doesn't matter. What matters is that you get this out. He leaned forward. There were 50 participants in the Subject V trial. Only 5 were deemed viable. Rachel Miller is one of them. The trials didn't end, they were dispersed. Monitored in real-world conditions. Every one of you flagged, tracked, manipulated. You think you've been uncovering a conspiracy, but it's more than that. You're living in it. He looked around, as if checking for someone just out of frame. Darnell Meyer wasn't running medical tests. They were running behavioral simulations, government-funded, corporate-controlled. Your resistance was anticipated. Your reaction, catalogued. But what they didn't anticipate, was this. He reached down and activated another file. Rachel stepped forward as a 3D scan lit up on the side wall, an interactive map showing the connections between the trial participants, their locations, known handlers, and projected outcomes. Rachel's name was highlighted. Beneath it, in bold, were 2 words, awakened subject. Carlson's voice returned. You passed the threshold. Which means they're going to escalate. But it also means you have leverage. Inside this drive, he held one up, are the names of those who designed this program. Real names. Not aliases. You release that, you shut them down. The screen cut to black. Ethan found the drive Carlson mentioned in a steel case beneath the console, along with a printed list of contacts marked with encryption keys and a failsafe transmission protocol. Rachel stood silently for a moment, processing everything. Then she said, "We go to the press." "Not just one." "All of them." Ethan nodded. "Marcus will spread the data across every independent network. Trina will handle the mainstream." Rachel turned to him. "They used me to test obedience," she said. "Let's show them what happens when we don't follow the script." Outside, a storm had begun to gather. But they were already moving. And for the first time, it wasn't just to run. It was to end it. The next 48 hours unfolded with the precision of a strike operation, but it wasn't war, it was exposure. Ethan, Rachel, and Marcus moved fast. The encrypted dossiers from Carlson's underground bunker were duplicated and broken into packets, each containing names, dates, directives, and transactional links tying high-level government liaisons, private military contractors, and pharmaceutical executives to the Subject V program and 3 other classified behavioral trials buried under a decades-old federal health initiative. The data was impossible to deny. Marcus coordinated the leak with chilling efficiency. Each transmission was released simultaneously to independent journalists, medical ethics organizations, and international media agencies. Trina Wells published her expose on Darnell Meyer Labs at 8 o'clock in the morning. By 9, her article was the top trending story in the country. By 10, federal regulators had launched emergency investigations into multiple subsidiaries tied to the pharmaceutical conglomerate. The name, Subject V, appeared on every major network by noon. Rachel and Ethan stayed off the grid during the chaos, watching the world unravel from a safe house deep in the Oregon hills. The place had no address, no cell signal, and no internet connection, just a shortwave relay hooked to a burst modem. Every 20 minutes, Marcus would check in with updates, and each time, the weight pressing on their shoulders grew lighter. By nightfall on the second day, arrest warrants had been issued for 8 senior officials across 3 agencies. Darnell Meyer's CEO resigned in a public press conference, denying knowledge but unable to explain the digital trail linking him to overseas suppression contracts. Lasserian Group's headquarters in Arlington was raided by a joint task force. Their server rooms were seized, and their off-book financials exposed. But none of it compared to what broke the following morning. Carlson's full video log was aired, unedited, on a syndicated international channel after one of the leaked packets was verified through an AI authentication protocol used by investigative bodies to confirm legitimacy. Millions watched as he described the psychological conditioning, the shadow trials, and the fate of the subjects like Rachel who had been stripped of agency and then surveilled under false identities. Rachel's name was withheld from the broadcast, but her story became the centerpiece of every follow-up segment. She was no longer hunted, she was protected. And for the first time, her face appeared not in secret dossiers, but in a report from Trina Wells titled, "The Woman Who Refused to Obey." Ethan read it 3 times in silence before setting the printout down on the cabin table. Rachel stood by the window, looking out at the mist creeping through the trees. The soft morning light traced the edge of her cheekbone, but her eyes were elsewhere, focused, distant, calm. "You're not hiding anymore," Ethan said. She turned, a quiet smile tugging at the corners of her mouth. "Neither are you." They had made their choices. And while the public now raged at the institutions that had betrayed them, while investigations mounted and careers collapsed, Ethan and Rachel didn't celebrate. They mourned what had been lost: Vanessa, Carlson's life in hiding, the pieces of themselves they would never get back. But in the cracks, there was something else. Not revenge. Not even vindication. Clarity. 2 weeks later, a federal oversight board invited Rachel to testify behind closed doors. Her lawyers negotiated whistleblower protections, and she agreed under one condition, that the Subject V program be declassified, dismantled, and barred from resurrection under any form. They complied. Her testimony was sealed, but those present would later describe it as meticulous, unflinching, and unforgettable. She recounted the trials, the aftermath, the surveillance. But she also spoke of choices, of the moment she decided to run instead of stay silent. Of the cost of inaction. Of the weight of truth. When she walked out of the federal building that day, she wasn't escorted by guards or flanked by reporters. She wore no disguise. She held Ethan's hand, and the two of them walked out together like anyone else in the crowd, free. Marcus went underground again, disappearing into the invisible networks he preferred. Before he vanished, he sent Ethan a final message: "You held the line. Now guard the quiet." Ethan didn't reply. He didn't need to. They moved again. Not far, but far enough. This time to a small town nestled in a valley in eastern Oregon, population under 2,000. There was no smart grid, no security system, no digital assistant tucked into the corner of the room. Their home was a restored farmhouse with solar panels, wood stove, and a landline phone they barely used. They grew herbs in the windowsill. They read in the mornings and walked through the fields in the evenings. Some nights, they sat by the fire without saying a word, the silence no longer heavy, but sacred. Rachel started teaching part-time at the local community center. Ethics in science. Research accountability. Her students didn't know the whole story, only that she spoke with the kind of authority that came from living through what she taught. Ethan worked for a logistics company again. Local routes. Nothing classified. Nothing complicated. He never touched another firewall. One day, a letter arrived without a return address. Inside was a photo. It showed an empty room, steel walls, a chair, a desk, a soft halo of overhead light. On the desk sat a file, closed. The label read, Subject V, terminated. No signature. No message. Just confirmation. Rachel placed it in a drawer and never looked at it again. They didn't chase the past anymore. It would always be there, in scars, in memory, in the way they checked shadows just a second longer than most. But it no longer ruled them. They had seen what systems could do. And they had decided, with clarity, to never become part of one again. Their story didn't end with a rescue. It ended with choice. And for the first time in a long time, they had the power to choose everything.